I stood quietly in the doorway when I overheard Daniel's voice, sharp and cold as glass breaking. He was on the phone, pacing the living room, his words cutting through the air like knives. I caught only bits: wasted years, pathetic dreams, a man blind to what's right in front. Hearing my own son dismiss all I had done stung deeper than I expected. My chest tightened, breath caught somewhere between disbelief and a quiet, burning hurt. But I said nothing. For decades, I gave everything to build a life for my family. Late nights drafting plans, hands blistered from remodeling this house with my own labor, money stretched thin to pay for Daniel's education. I sacrificed personal dreams and comfort, believing all those things I gave would lead to gratitude, maybe even love. Instead, his voice echoed betrayal. I could hear the smugness behind his words, the entitlement that made him blind to the foundation I had laid. Yet I stood still, swallowed the raw ache, and turned away silently. The walls seemed to press in on me as I moved through the rooms, carrying memories I suddenly felt too exhausted to hold. Every step heavy with the weight of being unvalued, unseen. That night, during the family gathering, the air was thick with an unspoken tension. Daniel's gaze was sharp, cold, and dismissive as he ignored me deliberately. Margaret's eyes glinted with amused disdain. When I tried to speak, he cut me off with a wave of his hand, blunt and final. "Not now, Dad." His rejection was absolute. I nodded wordlessly and walked away, trying to hide the sting in my throat. Alone down the long hallway, I pressed my palm against the cool wall, struggling to steady my shaking hands. It was a stark moment. Once the center of this family's world, now reduced to a shadow, an unwanted guest in my own home. The silence outside that room was crushing. I could almost hear Richard's old workshop in my mind, the sound of saws and hammers, the smell of fresh wood and linseed oil. Those memories, the sacrifices to keep this house standing solid, came flooding all at once and brought a coil of pain and disbelief that clenched my heart tightly. Daniel had no idea, no respect, no sense of debt. Later, when the laughter and chatter of the gathering floated upstairs, I remained alone, surrounded by the quiet I had rarely known in this house full of noise and life. And no bitterness tried to creep in. Beneath it was something darker, steadier, a silent flame of resolve. This humiliation, this deep wound and betrayal would not define me. Not yet. I sat still for a long time, the echo of Daniel's voice lingering like a shadow falling across the floor. I thought of all the plans I had made for us, all the hopes I once held tightly. But now, as the night deepened, so did a strange peace. The betrayal was a wound, yes, but from it something would grow. Because if the past had taught me anything, it was patience. It was endurance. And maybe, just maybe, it was the quiet seed of a reckoning yet to come. Later that evening, I found myself alone in my study, a small room cluttered with old blueprints, worn engineering manuals, and fading photographs. This room had been my sanctuary for decades, a place where ideas took shape and problems found solutions. Tonight, though, it felt like a mausoleum, housing the ghosts of a life I had built but that now seemed to mock me. I sank into the chair behind the desk, the familiar creak a comfort amidst my growing storm of thoughts. I traced the edges of a blueprint that depicted the house, our family's refuge, which I had redesigned and reinforced with my own hands over the years. Each line represented hours of precise calculation, sweat, and unwavering commitment. It was a reminder of more than just wood and nails. It embodied hope, security, and sacrifice. As my eyes wandered around the room, memories surfaced unbidden. I saw Daniel as a boy, with curious eyes and a mischievous grin, sitting patiently as I explained the principles of load distribution or structural integrity. We dreamed of his future, talking about the college he would attend, the career he would forge.
Back then, those blueprints represented not only plans for this home, but a foundation for his life. But those dreams now felt distant and tarnished, as if the years of dedication had been swept away by his callous contempt. I thought back to the countless late nights when I scrimped and saved, delaying necessary repairs or personal comforts so that Daniel could finish his education without worry. I remembered the tight budgets that forced me to choose between new tools or groceries, between preserving small joys and meeting obligations. I hadn't waited for praise, nor had I sought recognition. My joy came from seeing my family thrive, from knowing I had done my part. And yet, here I was, branded as irrelevant by the very son I labored to uplift.
A slow, resolute fire kindled inside me. This wasn't mere disappointment. It was a call to action. In the quiet embrace of this study, I allowed myself the brief luxury of grief. But soon, my grief transformed into reflection. I revisited the timeline of our family's history, the sacrifices no one noticed, the moments I had stifled resentment to ensure harmony. Despite my efforts, I realized I had been holding on to a fragile illusion, that love alone would guarantee respect. I pulled out an old photo album and flipped through yellowed pages. There we were, Daniel in his cap and gown, radiant with hope, Margaret smiling by his side. Moments of joy, milestones I had financed quietly and proudly. I had been the unseen architect of their success, the silent pillar they leaned on without ever acknowledging the weight I bore. My mind drifted back further to my own youth, when I first took up drafting and engineering. Preserve the original language of the text that would allow me to provide for a family I hoped to nurture. The road had been long and arduous, marked by lost opportunities and personal sacrifices. I had never imagined my lifetime of commitment would be met with disdain and betrayal. But beneath the sting of that betrayal, I found clarity. I could no longer be the passive provider, the silent sufferer. If Daniel saw only a faded relic, it was time to remind him who I truly was. Not through anger or confrontation, but through deliberate, measured resolve. I spent hours lost in thought, piecing together possibilities. My training as an engineer had taught me to analyze systems, find weak points, and develop solutions with precision. This situation demanded a different kind of blueprint, not one of steel and concrete, but of careful strategy and quiet strength. Financial independence was no longer merely a goal, it had become a necessity. Years of good faith had been taken for granted.
And I could not let that continue. I resolved to reclaim control over what was rightfully mine, to protect the legacy I had built, and to ensure that Daniel and Margaret could no longer threaten the stability of the family. What pained me most was not the loss of material wealth, but the erosion of trust. It was a wound that ran deeper than numbers and possessions, a wound that required more than just healing, but justice. With renewed determination, I returned to the scattered papers on the desk, picking up a pen. I began jotting down thoughts and ideas, sketching out plans for moving forward. It was a small act of reclamation amid the vast sense of betrayal. I knew the road ahead would be difficult and fraught with challenges. Daniel's arrogance and entitlement would not yield easily. Yet I was steady, my resolve shaped not by passion alone, but by decades of patience and meticulous thought. I understood the power of quiet action and measured steps. The night deepened around me as I worked, memories of past sacrifices fueling my purpose. Each decision, each plan was a brick laid toward a future where I would no longer be dismissed or underestimated. This was more than personal revenge. It was a restoration of dignity. I would stand firm, erect an unbreakable structure from the ruins of insult, and show, through intellect and integrity, that justice must be restored and arrogance punished. In that still room, beneath the soft glow of the desk lamp, a man shaped by decades of perseverance found his voice, not loud or angry, but calm and unyielding. I was no longer just the father who had given everything. I was becoming the architect of my own reclamation. Days passed with a deliberate quietness, each one folding into the next like the measured lines on the blueprint strewn across my desk. The initial sting of betrayal no longer held me captive. Instead, it hardened into focus. I laced my mornings with reflection and evenings with planning. Somewhere between the familiar creak of the armchair and the soft rustle of paper, I felt a shift taking place, not just within the walls of my study, but deep inside myself. Then came the cold confirmation, the discovery that Daniel planned to sell the house without even informing me. The very home I had built, fortified through years of hands-on labor and meticulous engineering, was to be treated as a commodity under his grasp. It was a violation that jolted me to the core. The house was more than timber and stone. It was the vessel of my sacrifices, the repository of memories and dreams I had nurtured for decades. That morning, an old friend from the neighborhood stopped by unexpectedly, carrying with him a parcel of news I had not anticipated. "Edward," he said quietly as we sat over coffee, "I heard things about the house. Daniel's making moves, trying to put it on the market, without your knowledge." His eyes bore into mine, conveying a mixture of sympathy and concern. I nodded, swallowing the growing knot in my throat. This was no mere financial maneuver. It was a calculated insult. For years, I had trusted Daniel to respect what I had built. I had believed that the foundation of our family was solid, that his sense of entitlement was tempered by gratitude and understanding. But his actions now revealed a willful disregard for that trust, an impatience wrapped in greed. My sorrow metamorphosed into resolve. In the quiet moments that followed, I began to outline a plan, relying on the very skills that had defined my life. As an engineer, I approached this upheaval as a problem to be dissected and addressed with precision. My mind cataloged the variables, financial implications, legal avenues, the web of relationships entangled in this family drama. I had to remain calm, strategic, and unassailable. The first step was information. The text I meticulously gathered what I could. Documents, public records, snippets from conversations overheard, and old financial statements long buried in files. Patterns emerged. Debts concealed behind layers of misleading paperwork, unauthorized decisions made in my name, and a fragile facade of wealth that barely masked disarray. I was no stranger to complexity. Years of managing large-scale projects had taught me to navigate bureaucracies and decode labyrinthine documentation. This was merely a different project, one where the stakes were deeply personal. Each day brought clarity, and with it a growing sense of empowerment. Beyond financial scrutiny, I reached out quietly to two trusted confidants from my past: an attorney who had once guided me through legal challenges, and a financial advisor familiar with estate matters. Their counsel was invaluable, and together we began to construct a framework for confronting Daniel's overreach. Legal recourse was an option, but I preferred a path measured in calculated pressure rather than confrontation. Simultaneously, I rekindled my connection to engineering, not as a retreat to past comforts, but as a source of renewed purpose. I sketched ideas for a consultancy, a legacy project that would reaffirm my value and independence. It was something tangible I could build with my own hands, free from the shadow of familial entitlement. As I laid the groundwork for this new venture, I felt the weight of years lift slightly. Each plan developed, each call made, was a reclaiming of agency. I was no longer the passive victim waiting at the mercy of others. I was becoming the architect of my future. In quiet moments, I wrestled with the paradox of my emotions. Grief persisted, tempered now by a steady determination. I acknowledged the pain of being dismissed and disrespected, yet I also recognized the necessity of detachment. This was not about vengeance born from rage, but about justice born from clarity. I thought about Daniel and Margaret, about the arrogance that had blinded them to the very sacrifices they had benefited from.
I knew they assumed their power was unassailable, that they could advance with impunity behind facades of entitlement. But I had learned that no structure, no matter how imposing, was immune to steady, precise pressure. One evening, as I reviewed the plans for the consultancy, I felt a quiet smile break the solemnity of my thoughts. This was not just survival, it was renewal. The house, the family, the memories, they were all part of a life I had shaped with patience, intellect, and resilience. Though some relationships might never mend, I could still forge a new path defined by my terms. I rehearsed conversations in my mind, practiced measured words that would withstand confrontation without yielding. I drew upon the patience honed over years of deadlines and setbacks, recognizing that this journey was as much about endurance as it was about action. The turning point had arrived, not in a dramatic outburst, but in a deliberate, steady setting of plans in motion. I refused to be hurried or provoked. Like a well-engineered structure absorbing the pressure of wind and time, I adapted and reinforced my resolve. Every layer of this plan was built on principles I had embraced since youth: integrity, precision, and quiet strength. I would navigate this with the same determination I once used to build bridges and secure foundations. The lessons of my past were my tools. My mind was the blueprint. This path was mine to chart. The humiliation I had endured became the bedrock upon which I would rebuild, not through impulsive anger, but through calculated, deliberate steps. The silent rebirth of my dignity was unfolding, one careful move at a time. The days following my resolve to reclaim what was mine unfolded with a patience and precision born from a lifetime spent dissecting problems piece by piece and reconstructing solutions with unassailable logic. I approached Daniel's financial affairs as I once approached intricate engineering projects, by thoroughly examining each component, tracing its connections, and identifying every point of stress or failure that could compromise the whole. Stacks of aged bank statements sat beside recently printed mortgage agreements, legal forms, and property titles. Each paper bore an imprint of neglect or deceit: loans taken out without my consent, property transfers initiated in the shadows, signatures that did not match mine, and financial commitments made under false pretenses. The facade Daniel presented to the world crumbled beneath the weight of these meticulous discoveries, revealing a fragile and dangerous game sustained by dishonesty and arrogance. I thought of the house, our family's refuge, a structure I had enhanced through sweat, calculations, and steadfast dedication. It was more than an edifice. It was the physical foundation for our life, a testament to years of labor and sacrifice. The knowledge that Daniel had sought to sell it, sidelining me entirely, struck like a blow not only to my pocketbook, but to the very sense of family and trust I had clung to. Delicately, I set to work assembling a credible team. An attorney from earlier days of my life who knew the labyrinthine channels of property and inheritance law, and a seasoned financial advisor with the skills to navigate tangled accounts and detect irregularities. Their assistance went beyond mere expertise. They offered a counsel untainted by emotion, a guiding hand through the complexity of the battle ahead. Together, we crafted a plan that was methodical, quietly aggressive, and grounded in the strength of evidence. It was clear that any attempt to challenge Daniel publicly would only fan the flames of conflict. Instead, our approach would be patient, factual, and, above all, strategic. The goal was to halt unauthorized transactions, especially the impending sale of the family home, and to lay bare the full extent of Daniel's reckless financial behavior, thereby regaining control through legitimate channels. While legal action formed one pillar of my response, the other was deeply personal. After years of retreating into the shadows of family responsibilities, I resolved to rebuild an identity independent of the familiar roles of father and provider. I unearthed old notes and sketches for a consultancy I had once dreamed about, a venture that would capitalize on my expertise in civil engineering and project management.
It was time to transform quiet knowledge and decades of experience into a flourishing business. Reaching out to past clients, trusted colleagues,
and professional contacts I had long neglected, I was reminded that respect earned through diligence endures despite the passage of time. This consultancy, I realized, could be a beacon of renewed purpose and autonomy, a testament to my continuing value and competence separate from the entanglements of familial strife. With each day devoted to compiling evidence, attending legal consultations, or drafting plans for my business, I felt a slow but steady reclamation of agency. My mornings were consumed with sifting through financial documents, uncovering more discrepancies with every passing hour. The night hours were reserved for mapping out service offerings and preparing pitch presentations, the kind of work that invigorated the part of me that had been dormant too long. Daniel and Margaret's response was predictable. Veiled threats wrapped in false concern, attempts to intimidate through proximity and presence. But I met their strategies unflinchingly with calm, clearly articulated legal notices and documented communications, each step further eroding their assumed dominance. It was a silent power shift, an unspoken warning that the game had changed and that they no longer commanded the board. I saw glimpses of their frustration manifest in tense family gatherings, as their faces betrayed growing impatience and fear. Their entitlement, once so unshakable, now revealed cracks. Their desperation was not simply about losing property or money. It was about loss of face, the unraveling of the carefully constructed illusion of control. Through it all, my consultancy gained traction. Initial inquiries and engagements with new clients rekindled my old passion for problem-solving and structural analysis. The routines of preparing calculated risk assessments, offering detailed project evaluations, and consulting on engineering solutions anchored me. They were a reminder that despite personal turmoil, my skills and value remained intact. Our family home, with its sturdy beams and reinforced walls, was a silent witness to my transformation. The structure I had maintained and strengthened over the years mirrored my own journey from shattered pride to quiet resilience. In its familiar rooms, I traced memories of shared moments and sacrifices, understanding that while some relationships might never heal, new foundations can still be laid. As I reflected on that painful day when Daniel's call shattered illusions, I recognized that humiliation had become a bedrock from which my dignity was being reconstructed. This process demanded an engineer's patience, a careful application of pressure where the weakest points lie, a measured reinforcement that would last. I rehearsed dialogues I might have with Daniel and Margaret, honing responses that were firm yet composed, acknowledging the battle's gravity without succumbing to bitterness. This was not a conflict of tempers, but a demonstration of endurance, strategic thinking, and quiet confidence. Such strength, I reminded myself, was more formidable than any open confrontation. Every move I made was deliberate. Scrutinizing financial data, engaging legal counsel, reviving professional connections, all were components of a larger architecture of redemption. I was constructing a new identity, an unyielding fortress, designed not through bricks and mortar, but through intellect and will. Daniel and Margaret had misjudged the consequences of their arrogance. They assumed their grasp on the family estate and its presumed wealth was unassailable, built on the naive expectation that I would merely endure. But like the most carefully engineered bridge, no matter how imposing, can succumb to unseen stress and gradual erosion, their foundation was weakening under persistent pressure. As months rolled on, the initial shockwaves of betrayal settled into a structured campaign of reclamation. Far from surrendering, I was assertively dismantling falsehoods and reestablishing order. This was no mere act of retaliation. It was a restoration of justice and honor. Amidst the tension and legal maneuvering, I felt a profound sense of renewal. The consultancy provided not just income, but a rejuvenation of purpose, a reclaiming of control over my destiny. The family fractures hurt deeply, but my focus shifted increasingly toward building a future where I was valued on my terms.
The silent transformation was unmistakable. I was no longer simply the man cast aside by his son. I was an architect of his own fate, a steady force reclaiming ground inch by inch with patience and precision. This was a long and arduous battle, but like every enduring structure I had designed, it was founded on principles that would not easily yield: integrity, resilience, and thoughtful strength. The blueprints of my life were being redrawn, not with bitterness, but with clarity and calm resolve.
I was finally becoming more than the dismissed provider. I was becoming the master of my destiny, and no advantage claimed without honor could withstand the quiet, unyielding force that was now rising within me. The first time I confronted the tangible fruits of my silent strategy, it was like watching a meticulously constructed dam begin to crack under the weight of a slow but relentless current. I enacted the first measures with deliberate care, halting the automatic transfers of funds into accounts Daniel controlled. Years of financial goodwill, extended through blind trust, had become weapons against me, and it was time to draw the line. Access to shared credit cards was revoked with the legal counsel's help, and automatic payments subject to Daniel's directives were frozen. Each step was surgically precise, calculated to preserve the family's assets without inciting unnecessary confrontation. There was no impulse here, only methodical reinforcement. The slow tightening of a grip that would never loosen again. I knew the terrain well, how leverage shifted, how power could be wrested back quietly yet decisively. With each blocked transaction, I sent a clear message that the old order, where Daniel had free reign over resources I had labored to provide, was over. This was not about cutting off support out of bitterness. It was about reclaiming control, demanding accountability, and halting the erosion of a legacy built over a lifetime. Next came efforts to contest the unauthorized transactions related to property sales. When I uncovered documents related to an attempted sale of the family home, a move made without my consent, I immediately moved to legally challenge the sale. Partnering with my attorney, I filed injunctions preventing any transfer of ownership until a thorough review could be completed. The courtroom became an unexpected arena, demanding a new form of endurance and strategy. Different from any blueprint I had ever worked on, but no less demanding. Throughout this process, Daniel and Margaret were blindsided. I could sense their surprise and frustration, their confident facade faltering in the face of legal precision and quiet resistance. Their attempts to intimidate me failed to break my calm. Instead, each confrontation only underscored the growing chasm between the arrogance they wielded and the disciplined resolve I brought to bear. The first time Daniel faced me after these measures was a moment layered with tension and unsaid words. He confronted me with accusations veiled thinly as concern. Why was I sabotaging the family unity, destroying the trust we had? But beneath the masks of subdued anger lay unmistakable fear and desperation. He was encountering a version of me he had never known, a man neither resentful nor enraged, but immovably centered, armed with unassailable facts and deliberate actions. My words were measured, calm, and firm. I reminded him that respect and honesty were not mere courtesies, but foundational requirements. Each boundary I set was not an act of aggression, but a necessary step to protect what was rightfully ours, the fruits of sacrifice I had sustained long after my patience had worn thin. As I navigated these heated encounters, the consultancy I had quietly launched began to take root. I signed contracts and engaged with clients whose projects demanded the expertise only decades of hands-on experience could provide. My reputation, carefully cultivated over years, proved resilient. Clients respected the precision and integrity I brought to their endeavors. This fledgling business became a sanctuary and a symbol, a reminder that I was far from defeated, that I could forge independence and relevance on my own terms. The weeks spent drafting proposals, preparing risk assessments, and advising on structural projects grounded me, offering focus and purpose beyond family strife.
Daniel and Margaret's household, once so assured in its dominance, became a site of growing unease. I heard through mutual friends and casual conversations that their confidence wavered, their plans disrupted, not just by legal challenges, but by the unstoppable quiet unfolding of my professional reclamation. Despite their attempts to confront and unsettle me, I remained unfazed. Their tactics were predictable: evasions, deflections, half-truths, but beneath the surface, their frustration mounted. The veneer of entitlement thinned with every obstacle I introduced, every contract I signed, every legal boundary reinforced. In private moments, I reflected on the shifts in our fractured family dynamic. What had once seemed an unassailable fortress of mutual dependency was now a landscape marked by caution, redefined roles, and recalibrated respect. I was no longer sidelined or discarded. I was an active participant, steering my life with renewed clarity. There were times when the weight of these changes pressed heavily, the loneliness of standing against ingrained patterns, the sorrow of fractured bonds with my son and daughter-in-law. But these were balanced by the quiet triumphs, the successful contracts, the legal victories, the restored pride that came not from rage but from unwavering resolve. With each passing week, I grew stronger in the knowledge that my dignity was not just preserved, but reaffirmed. The consultancy flourished enough to secure steady income, alleviating financial dependency on Daniel. This practical autonomy was more than monetary. It was a declaration that I was no longer subject to his whims or entitlement. The growing tension between us manifested in subtle ways: curt replies to invitations, strained silences at family events, and a clear shift in who held influence and who was relegated to the margins. Yet, amidst this upheaval, I preserved my calm, choosing to respond with reason and integrity rather than bitterness or strife. Each encounter with Daniel and Margaret became a test of endurance, a chess match of wills where patience and preparedness were my allies. Their veiled threats and provocations were met not with reaction, but with well-reasoned calm, exposing the fragility beneath their bluster. In the quiet hours, I would often sit in my study, surrounded by blueprints and legal documents, contemplating the long road I had traveled. The sacrifices of the past, once taken for granted, now fueled a renewed purpose. I had transformed from a man bruised by betrayal into one empowered by quiet vengeance, measured, strategic, and utterly relentless. This was no longer a passive existence marked by concession. It was a reclamation built not on anger, but on the slow, deliberate erosion of false power. I had become the master of my fate once more. Through legal channels and deliberate professional steps, I dismantled Daniel's assumptions piece by piece. Each document, each successful client engagement served as bricks in the new foundation of respect and autonomy I was constructing. The house, once threatened, remained firmly under my stewardship, protected by legal certainty and personal resolve. I was no longer the victim of circumstance or the bearer of unreciprocated sacrifice. I had become a force of quiet justice, an embodiment of the principle that those who disregard honor eventually confront consequence. In the evolving landscape of our family, I stood solid and unyielding, a man who had weathered the storm of betrayal and emerged not broken but rebuilt, his spirit fortified by intellect, patience, and an unshakable commitment to justice. The day of the family meeting arrived, not with fanfare or confrontation, but with the heavy stillness of inevitability. The same walls that had once echoed with laughter and celebration now seemed to brace for the weight of truths long buried. The familiar faces assembled in the living room, their expressions guarded, eyes flickering with anticipation mixed with apprehension. Daniel and Margaret entered with their usual composure, carefully practiced smiles in place, but beneath that polished surface I sensed the tremors of uncertainty. The unspoken realization that the comfortable dominance they once wielded was quietly unraveling had unsettled them.
In my hands, I held not just papers, but months of painstaking labor, documents bound together like a map of broken trust and betrayal. Financial records marked by questionable transactions, undisclosed debts, unauthorized property dealings, and signatures that bore my name without my consent. This was the evidence of a quiet usurpation of power, a slow erosion of the family's foundation, and the betrayal of the very values we once upheld. I began with a steady voice, grounded in calm resolve. I recounted the years of sacrifice and support I had poured into our family, not for recognition, but out of love and duty. Then, deliberately, I unfolded the narrative of mismanagement and deception. I spoke not in anger, but with incisive clarity, laying bare the unauthorized dealings with shared assets, the reckless financial decisions disguised as progress, and the ultimate betrayal of attempting to sell the family home without any consultation or consent. The room fell into a heavy silence after each revelation, the weight of undeniable truth pressing upon us all. Faces that had once borne complacency now showed signs of shock, disbelief, and for some, the bitter taste of regret. Daniel's confident mask wavered. His eyes flicked nervously toward Margaret, who wore tension like a thin veil, her usual poise fracturing under the severity of the accusations. For too long, their arrogance had allowed them to ignore the debts owed, not simply monetary, but debts of respect, gratitude, and responsibility. In that moment, all illusions of entitlement shattered, revealing the emptiness beneath. Daniel's attempts to deflect blame and dismiss the evidence were weak and scattered, his voice rising but lacking conviction. Margaret's defenses echoed his, but both were undone by the weight of legal proofs and documented facts. I met their protests with unwavering calm, reinforcing that my purpose was restoration, not retribution. I reminded everyone present that our family's legacy was built on trust and collective responsibility, which had been grievously violated. I outlined a path forward: transparent financial oversight, legal stewardship of shared assets, and mechanisms to prevent any further breaches of trust. This was not merely about protecting property, but about healing fractured bonds. Slowly, others in the room nodded in fragile agreement, voices breaking through silence with tentative support for the reforms proposed. The power Daniel and Margaret once assumed now dissipated, replaced by cautious acceptance of necessary change. This meeting marked a definitive turning point, the last pillar supporting false authority crumbling visibly before us. Denial could no longer shield misdeeds, and silence could no longer obscure wounds. The future of our family rested on rebuilding foundations long neglected, on honesty, accountability, and restored respect. Throughout the proceedings, I maintained composure, resisting any urge toward triumph or bitterness. I understood that true power is reflected in measured resolve and clarity of purpose, not in rash confrontation. The betrayal inflicted upon me would always leave a scar. Yet it was a scar that fueled more than suffering. It fueled unwavering determination. As the gathering dispersed, a profound sense of quiet satisfaction settled within me. The truth, once buried beneath layers of denial and disrespect, had been brought into the open. With light comes healing, slow and deliberate, but essential. My role had shifted from that of a silent sufferer to an active guardian of justice and restoration. In the days that followed, I reflected on the deep journey this had been. The road from betrayal to vindication was treacherous, lined with emotional landmines and legal complexities. Yet it had led me to a place of renewed strength and purpose, a place where dignity was not just preserved but reaffirmed. The family home stood firm amidst the turmoil, a symbol not only of the past sacrifices but of resilience and new beginnings. While fractured relationships remained a reality, so did the possibility of reconciliation founded on respect and transparency.
I had learned that justice is not a singular moment but an ongoing commitment. The family meeting was not an endpoint but a beginning. A call to rebuild the bonds broken by deceit and to realign our legacy with truth and honor. In that solemn realization, I understood that my journey was more than personal. It was a testament to the enduring power of integrity over entitlement, patience over impulse, and reason over rage. In that moment, beneath the careful gaze of those who had once doubted me, I embraced my role not just as a father wronged, but as the steward of a legacy reclaimed. A quiet force standing firm against betrayal, embodying resilience, and paving a future built on justice and unwavering resolve. The morning after the family meeting settled over the house like a gentle calm after a long storm. I moved through the rooms, familiar and silent, each corner echoing the sounds of a life built on promise and sacrifice. The laughter of my children, the quiet moments of reflection, the countless nights spent worrying about the future. This house was more than wood and stone. It was the vessel of my hopes and the monument to years of hard work. Standing in the living room, I felt the weight of those memories, the bittersweet blend of warmth and ache. I had given everything to build a life for this family, time, energy, dreams deferred. But now I saw that my worth extended beyond what was taken for granted. I no longer felt diminished by the past. Instead, I was grounded in a renewed strength that came from overcoming betrayal without losing myself. The consultancy that I had breathed life into during the darkest days became a beacon of hope and purpose. It was more than a business. It was a reclamation of identity. Each call I took, every project proposal I reviewed, reminded me that I was not merely a provider for my son, but a man capable in his own right, still valuable and respected. This new chapter was forged not in resentment, but in determination, humility, and quiet pride. Yet, the family ties I once cherished were fractured. Some doors remained closed, some voices silent. It was a painful truth that not all wounds heal with time, that some bridges burn beyond repair. I accepted this as part of the journey, grieving what might never be restored while holding on to what still could grow. The house stood firm, a living witness to endurance and resilience. It was a silent reminder that even the strongest structures bear scars, and yet, with care, they endure. This home embodied not just the past sacrifices, but the possibility of new beginnings. Justice, I realized, was no longer a single event marked by victories or vindication. It was an ongoing commitment, an everyday choice to act with integrity, patience, and grace. The family meeting was not a conclusion but an opening, a call to rebuild broken bonds through honesty and respect. Through the trial of betrayal and the painstaking process of restoration, I had discovered a profound truth. Strength lies not in anger or haste, but in measured resolve and steadfast principles. The quiet vengeance I had sought was one of endurance and clarity, not of destruction. As I stood in the soft morning light filtering through the windows, I embraced this new role, not just as a father who had been wronged, but as the steward of a legacy restored. I was a quiet force, resolute and unwavering, a man who had faced betrayal and emerged rebuilt, his spirit fortified by intellect, patience, and an unshakable will. I had built my life on sacrifice, brick by brick, moment by moment. Now I reclaimed it, not as a burden, but as a foundation for my future. With dignity reclaimed and justice pursued, I looked ahead, ready to live on my own terms, grounded by the lessons of the past and the unyielding hope of what lay still to come. I had built my life on sacrifice, brick by brick, moment by moment. Now I reclaimed it, not as a burden, but as a foundation for my future. With dignity reclaimed and justice pursued, I looked ahead, ready to live on my own terms, grounded by the lessons of the past and the unyielding hope of what lay still to come.